A young woman, barely 19, walked towards what many would later call the most dangerous altar in Russian history. She was said to be carrying a poison that would claim her life within 15 days, though she had no idea. Marfa Sobakina could never have known that a simple tonic from a desperate mother, hoping to ensure her daughter's fertility, could turn her wedding night into a death sentence. The hope of a new imperial heir became, according to court gossip, the spark for one of the most ferocious acts of vengeance ever seen in Moscow. This is the story of Marfa, a woman who won a colossal bridal contest only to meet her end in a lavish chamber, and the tale of Ivan IV, a ruler whose paranoia would be cemented by a tragedy he believed was a conspiracy. This is the truth behind the legend of Ivan the Terrible and his third bride. The bridal chamber of 1571 was not only the scene of a Tsarina's demise, but the birthplace of a monster, a ruler's desperate gamble. The year was 1571. Across the vast lands of Russia, a shadow of fear loomed large, cast by the iron fist of Ivan the Terrible's secret police, the Oprichniki. At 41, the Tsar was a man of calculated terror. He had already buried 2 wives and 2 sons. Each loss deepened his obsession with securing a male heir and fueled his growing paranoia. He needed a new wife, not just for love, but for survival. A woman who could provide a legitimate successor and stabilize his dynasty. To find her, Ivan launched the largest bridal contest Muscovy had ever seen. Envoys were dispatched across the empire, summoning more than 2,000 eligible maidens to the fortress of Alexandrovskaya Sloboda, the headquarters of his dreaded bodyguard. This wasn't a fairy tale. It was a brutal selection process. Executions in the citadel's squares were as common as daily meals, a grim reminder that the Tsar's favor could be as lethal as his wrath. These women were not just hopefuls. They were pawns in a desperate political and dynastic game. The victor of the imperial pageant, among the 2,000 hopefuls, a young woman stood out. Marfa Sobakina, the 19-year-old daughter of a wealthy merchant from Novgorod, was a breath of fresh air amidst the terror of the court. Observers described her as gentle, yet composed, with a quiet intelligence that seemed to promise stability for a restless empire. Her eyes, deep and clear as northern lakes, held a calm that charmed the Tsar and the astrologers who inspected her. Marfa's selection was more than just a personal triumph. It was a quiet revolution. She represented a rising class of merchants and entrepreneurs, and her marriage to the Tsar hinted that Russia's future might rest not only on bloodlines, but on merit and enterprise. To Ivan, she was the ideal counterpart, a figure who seemed to blend innocence with a quiet strength. She offered him a final chance to anchor his dynasty with an unassailable successor. A mother's potion, a daughter's fate. But while courtiers prepared embroidered gowns and ceremonial crowns, an invisible and inexorable force was already at work. Far away in Novgorod, Marfa's anxious mother, wanting to ensure her daughter's health and fertility on her wedding night, had turned to an old household remedy. According to later accounts, the potion contained mercury, an ingredient praised by village healers for stimulating conception. The mother, with trembling hands, is said to have measured the dose, completely unaware that the very draught meant to secure a grandson for the throne would poison the daughter she loved. This tragic twist of fate perfectly captures the paradox of the time. To modern ears, giving mercury to a loved one sounds reckless and insane, but in the 16th century it was considered advanced science. Healers of the day celebrated mercury for treating everything from skin ailments to infertility. The mother's act was one of love and hope, not malice, making the outcome all the more heart-wrenching. The very substance meant to quicken conception would instead ravage Marfa's body from within. The ill-fated wedding. The wedding on October 28, 1571, at the Trinity Church in Alexandrovskaya Sloboda, was meant to be a display of imperial triumph. Instead, it became an omen. Witnesses recalled that Marfa, beneath the crimson weight of her bridal robes, looked pale and frail, her cheeks drained of color. Attendants had to discreetly steady her as she walked to the altar. During the solemn exchange of vows, she swayed and collapsed twice. The priests were quick to interpret her fainting as mystical modesty, but the physicians nearby saw something far more troubling. They noted tremors in her limbs, perspiration slicking her brow, and pupils that were unnaturally wide. They whispered of a dangerous imbalance in her body, perhaps a poison none of them could name. The wedding feast, which should have lasted until morning, faltered before midnight. The rich dishes of roast swan and spiced honey stood untouched as concern spread through the hall. The marriage night, designed to secure the empire's future, was dissolving into a tense vigil beside a stricken bride. The longest 15 days, the marriage was never consummated. Instead, Ivan found a young woman fighting for consciousness in the lavish bridal apartments. Chroniclers say he paced the chamber, torn between anger and alarm. He summoned physicians who brought their remedies of herbs and prayers, but nothing worked. The mercury, absorbed into her bloodstream, was already at work, disrupting her nerves and searing her stomach. No healer of the 16th century could have traced the connection between a mother's talisman and a Tsarina's sudden demise. For 2 weeks, the court lived in a tense stillness. Some sources describe Ivan kneeling in prayer, while others speak of his furious interrogations, demanding to know who dared to harm his household. Servants whispered of hexes and secret enemies among the boyars. The physicians clung to simpler explanations like fever and exhaustion, but they couldn't stop the inevitable decline. On November 13, 1571, just 15 days after the wedding, Marfa Sobakina breathed her last in the Tsar's arms. Her death marked the end of a tragic chapter and the beginning of a terrifying new one. The storm of vengeance Ivan's grief hardened instantly into rage. Convinced his third wife had been poisoned by hidden hands, he launched a storm of vengeance. 20 people, attendants, doctors, and even distant relatives, were seized for questioning. The torture chambers of the Kremlin echoed with cries as Ivan led a merciless investigation. He was determined to find the traitors he was certain had stolen his bride. The accounts of this purge are chilling. A nobleman was said to have been publicly impaled alive in Red Square, a spectacle that stretched for 3 unbearable hours. Chains clinked nearby as other prisoners watched, realizing the same agony awaited them. Marfa's grieving father, Vasily Sobakin, was forced into distant monastic exile, but his sons were less fortunate, with records speaking of beheadings justified by charges of witchcraft. What began as mourning swiftly became a purge driven by a ruler's corrosive paranoia. The enduring mystery centuries later, scholars and historians have worked tirelessly to untangle the facts from the legend. The official story was one of poisoning, but the identity of the poisoner was always a mystery. The truth was far more tragic and mundane. Under torture, some captives confessed that Marfa's mother had secretly mixed a potion to ensure her daughter's fertility. Its key ingredient was mercury. By the time this confession surfaced, the scaffold had already claimed the lives of many innocent people. In 2009, forensic anthropologist Saiton examined remains attributed to Marfa Sobakina. The tests revealed traces of mercury in her bones, supporting the chronicler's tale of a lethal folk remedy. The findings did not conclusively prove it, but they lent weight to the tragic story that a mother's love, not a hidden enemy, was the true weapon. This discovery added a new layer of sorrow to an already heartbreaking tale. A legacy of paranoia. Marfa's sudden death did more than just darken one household. It pressed Ivan further toward the brutal vigilance that would shape the last years of his reign. The episode seemed to confirm his deepest fears, that betrayal could lurk even within the domestic walls of his palace. Poisoning the cup meant to bless his dynasty. From that winter forward, Ivan tightened his grip on his subjects and advisors, setting the stage for years of suspicion and bloodshed. This singular tragedy is linked by historians to the Tsar's later atrocities, including policies and massacres that crushed towns and shattered noble families. The story, as storytellers insist, all traces back to a single act of misguided love. A few grains of mercury, passed in secrecy, became, in the lore of the time, the quietest weapon history had known. Final lessons from the past. Marfa Sobakina's story is a chilling reminder that beneath the splendor of crowns, peril was as lethal as any battlefield. Her fate was not a grand political conspiracy, but a personal tragedy, a simple act of love with devastating consequences. It reveals how folk medicine, intended to bring life, could become a silent killer, and how a ruler's grief could transform into a relentless and brutal paranoia. The tale is a haunting reflection on the hidden dangers that lurked behind palace doors and the medical customs that decided who would rule and who would vanish. Marfa's short life, and the vengeance that followed her death, became the opening chapter in a long chronicle of tragedies that shaped a nation. It's a testament to how the most personal of sorrows can echo through history and redefine a dynasty forever.